Good to go.
Welcome, everybody, into HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It's a special interview. It would be a special interview anyway. One of the icons for the Arkansas Razorbacks. When you look at Scotty Thurman's career from Ruston, Louisiana, the Ruston Rifle, he is an Arkansan by choice and has had beyond basketball and playing for the Razorbacks, a decade and more pro career, but also coming back and coaching. He's the current coach for the Little Rock Parkview Patriots, has had great success as a head coach there. Before that, he was an assistant coach with Arkansas Razorbacks in the basketball administrative role before that under Mike Anderson. So he's really given back to the state beyond just being a great player. But Scotty, welcome in. First of all, I want to thank you for joining me because in about 48 hours, Arkansas basketball is going to kind of flip the pages back to some memories when Arkansas hosts 7th-ranked Duke and the first ever ACC SEC Challenge. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, man, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be on. Obviously, this is an exciting time in Razorback basketball history with all of the build-up for this matchup. I've been watching some of the features on Hog Plus and seeing some of the different interviews and looking at some of the highlights on Twitter and different things from back when it was the Mayday era all the way up until the time we got the opportunity to play, man. So it's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to hopefully a good game, and hopefully the Razorbacks can go out and pick up on what we were able to do. I think it's 2-2 overall series, so hopefully they can go ahead and break that tie.
That's it. We'll call it the tiebreaker for now. I don't know if you can see behind me most of or part of a little mini banner from that 94 title, but everyone knows you hit the shot. The game was knotted up. You hit a big 3-point shot at the end of the shot clock with under a minute to play. That's iconic. Arkansas's one and only national title. But I really wanted to talk about, because you talked about the series record at 2-2, and the stakes have always been high when these two teams have played. In fact, this will be the first time that both teams aren't ranked in this matchup. But you went back to Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, Oliver Miller. Those were the first two teams. The first couple of times that Arkansas played was with that group. Arkansas loses in the Final Four in 1990 in Denver. The following season in the preseason NIT, I mean, it was loaded. Arkansas was second ranked. Duke was sixth. Arizona was third. And you're in the semifinals in Madison Square Garden. And Arkansas, Todd Day went off for 20-plus points. Arkansas wins by 10. So you got even on the scoreboard. Then you put Arkansas ahead in the biggest game these two teams have ever played against each other in that title game. And then, of course, just a couple of years ago in the Elite Eight for the right to advance to a Final Four, Eric Musselman, Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski's final season as head coach at Duke. The Blue Devils won in advance, so the series is not up at 2-all. But take us back, Scotty. Take us back to that title game, because I don't think there's a more pressure-filled situation than a national title game in the Final Four in college basketball. But please take us back and kind of recall what you can from that moment.
Well, I mean, I remember pretty much, the whole season in terms of just the build-up. Obviously when you're playing, they tell you not to read your press clippings, but, when you're playing, you're always going to see from ESPN or AP poll or USA Today poll. Back then, I think there were 4 or 5 different polls that rated teams. And so for us as players, we always thought that we never really got the respect that we deserve. And obviously that was our head coach's mantra anyway, which was lack of respect. And so whenever we would lose a game, which I think the year we won the championship, we only lost 3 games, but whenever we lost one, it would be amazing. We'd be number 1 in the country. We'd lose and we drop to 5. And then you watch Duke maybe be number 1, they'd lose, they drop to 2. And so for us, we always felt like, it was other people that had favoritism towards their program that maybe didn't really know the personnel of each team, because we still felt like, even after losing the game, we felt like we were the better team in the country. But fast forwarding to the Final Four, we get there on the championship game. Obviously, the president's coming to the game, so there's all type of Secret Service, and everybody's trying to get set up. You got the media people, and you get 45 minutes to shoot around. And so once you touch the ball, the clock starts. Well, somehow we get times mixed up, and so we get there, and I think when I walk out on the floor, there's like 3 minutes on the time, and we're thinking this is not our time. That must be from the previous team. And no, this was your guys' time. So we wound up not really having a shoot around, because per NCAA rule, when the horn goes off, you're pretty much done. And so now you fast forward to right before the game, you hear Coach Richardson, he's walking, and back then in the Charlotte Coliseum, the concourse level was ground. It wasn't up in the top like Bud Walton. It was ground level. And so you could hear Coach's voice, and he's just going off. He's letting everybody have it about lack of respect. They gave us the wrong time. It was intentional. And so we get on the bus, and I think Mike Nell had given him a T-shirt or something that had Duke, Arizona.
Yeah.
And from that point on, the lack of respect and all the things that he had been telling us all year, no one felt like we should be there. No one thought we were the better team. All that stuff just kind of was the buildup. And so now we're thinking, okay, we really do have to prove to everyone in the country that we're the best team in the country in the state of North Carolina. And so for us to go into that game, obviously they had like a 10-point lead, I think, at like the 5-minute mark.
Yeah.
And Coach called a timeout. And Coach was really big on talking to the players about what defense we wanted to play. And so he asked Corey and myself, hey, what defense you guys feel good in? And we were like, we had been in the matchup zone most of the game. We were like, we need to pick them up. And so we started picking them up and turning them over and getting stops and getting quick scores. And we wound up going ahead. They called a timeout. And at that point, we felt like the momentum was in our advantage. And then, you fast forward to the play where Corey goes baseline. He's looking for Corey to throw it in. And he's surrounded by Grant Hill, Eric Meek, and I think even Chris Collins or Capel was, down in there trying to dig the ball out had it gone in. And so I had, on the right side of the floor, went to the block thinking that he was going to throw it in and maybe I'd be able to sneak in and get an offensive rebound or a tip in. Well, the ball never entered the quarters. It got passed out to Dwight, and Dwight bobbled it. Well, as it's going out to Dwight, I peep up at the clock and I see it's only like 6. And I'm thinking if Dwight doesn't shoot this ball and it comes out to me, I'm going to have to shoot it. And so I pop out to the wing. I was standing behind Lane, and he had lost sight of me for that brief second. I pop out to the wing, and Dwight bobbles the ball and kicks it to me, and the rest is history. But the main thing I remember about that play is that, Coach always talked about sacrificing and being, and making plays for the betterment of the team, not for yourself. Obviously, when you're 18, 19, some of that stuff you hear, some of that stuff you don't. But I was always very thankful that Dwight was unselfish enough to bobble the ball and still pass it. I think most guys in that moment would have probably grabbed it and shot it. And I still believe to this day, had he not bobbled, he would have taken the shot and made it. But fortunately for us, he had the wherewithal to pass the ball, which is an unselfish play. And we wound up catapulting us to the national championship.
That shot was tough, especially Antonio Lang. That was a long, athletic dude.
Right.
That you could see it in the replays, but we saw you do it so many times. And I think people get used to the idea that the Ruston Rifle was a big shot maker. I remember earlier in that season, Tennessee always had players, but they weren't necessarily one of the top programs in the SEC as far as the standings every year. But on the road, you had to hit a big shot to win that game. That was a struggle game.
Right.
And you played again. I mean, it's not often, though. We talk about Duke. And that's and obviously a national title game puts it up in its own stratosphere. But you've been on the court in Bud Walton Arena against some blue blood competition. Kentucky, the following season, sticking that dagger against the Wildcats on Super Bowl Sunday with a national TV audience, both teams highly ranked. What's it like? Because you don't get a lot of non-conference opportunities like Arkansas is going to get with Duke and Bud Walton. You just don't. But what's it like on a stage like a Kentucky or Duke as a player to get to host that game when that place is going to go wild?
I mean, as a player, it makes you realize that's why you chose to go to Arkansas. I think so many times people look at the SEC overall and just think football. Mm-hmm. And they forget that even the year we were in the Final Four, it was Arkansas and Florida. Nobody ever talks about Florida being there. And so I've always just relished in the fact that, when we got the opportunity to play at Kentucky on Super Bowl Sunday, to play a Duke, whether that be at Charlotte or in a neutral site, I mean, for me, it's a big deal. And growing up in Louisiana, obviously, never knowing that I would even attend Arkansas, but once I got the opportunity to go there and why I made the choice to go there, it just validated, why I went there and wanting to have the opportunity to play big-time basketball close to home. And that's what I think a lot of people lose sight of. Obviously, you got, people on Twitter have comments and different things, but in that time, it was all, you had to read it. You had to read it in the news, you had to read it on the internet. If your computer was fast enough, you had to get Sports Illustrated magazine, Streets and Smith, Athlon. So all your information was what you had to take in from reading it, not from hearing it. But the one thing that has always resonated with me is that Arkansas is a big-time program, and I think some people forget that. I think they look at Arkansas, oh, it's just a flagship school. Yeah, that's true. But Arkansas, for me, it's a national treasure. It is a big-time school, especially a big-time basketball school.
Well, and you were more than just a big shot maker. I'm going to go refer to a couple of things. First, I want to start with, by the way, Scotty Thurman is the all-time freshman leading scorer at Arkansas. Moses Moody put a scare into you, Scotty. He came within a point a few years ago, but you still carry the banner. But you're also top 10 in scoring all time at the University of Arkansas, one of the most prolific three-point shooters. Folks know that. But, Scotty, going back to your freshman season, you had some adversity coming in with Corliss because you got hurt early against Memphis.
Right.
You guys go on and figure out a way to win that game, but you went on to have arguably the greatest stretch of games for a freshman. Here's Corliss, a guy that was the Gatorade National Player of the Year and would turn out to be arguably the GOAT at Arkansas. But you had to carry that team for a while. You had help. We know it wasn't just you, but from a scoring standpoint and some of the other things you did. Talk a little bit about being thrust into that situation, your confidence level, and how you were able to do what you did against Missouri, against Arizona. Some of those games while Corliss was out to help Arkansas not only hold steady, but actually excel.
Well, I think, back in our day, Kevin, people forget, kids don't watch basketball anymore. Kids, they play, but they don't really watch. They don't really watch the game. They may watch pros, but they don't really watch college. Well, I grew up my whole life watching college basketball, wanting to be on CBS, wanting to maybe have the opportunity, whether it was the Big East, whether it was ACC, SEC, just wanting to have that opportunity. And so growing up, I had an older brother that was probably a better player than me. I had other siblings and cousins that were good athletes. And so I remember once upon a time when I couldn't even get a shot off because they wouldn't let me. And so for me, when I got to middle school and high school, I had coaches that invested in me and put the time in me and also instilled the confidence in me that I could be a good player. And so when I got to Arkansas, get there early, I graduated May 18th. I get there May 29th because my dad was like, hey, there's nothing else for you to do here. You need to go ahead and get up there, get induced to the strength program and, the eating program and all things you're going to have to do to be a good college player. So I'm like, hey, okay. But when I got there, summer school had already started. So I didn't get the opportunity to attend summer school. Got a summer job, started working, and then just started working out. And then at that time, you had Todd Day, who was just drafted to the Bucks. Lee Perry just drafted to the Bucks. Oliver Miller, who was just drafted to, I think it was Phoenix back then.
Yeah.
And so when we finally get the opportunity to start playing against those guys, it just reminded me of my childhood, playing against older guys, getting beat up some, having some success some. So when I got the opportunity to play against people my age that weren't pros, but that were college level players like me, my confidence was through the roof because I'm like, hey, I just battled Todd Day all summer. And yeah, I got my butt kicked some, but I also played well some. And so won some, lost some. But for me, the experience was, hey, Corliss is out. I've got to pick up the slack. And that's what we always talked about. People don't realize, but Corliss and I wouldn't say it was a joint decision to go to Arkansas, but we both had an effect on each other's decision to attend there. And so for me, I felt the responsibility to try to carry the team until he got back. And fortunately for me, I had the confidence and I had the trust from my teammates and from my coaches to be able to take big shots and to be able to have the ball in my hands at critical moments. And ultimately, I thrived with the opportunity.
Well, that's what I wanted to then kind of segue back to that title season because obviously Corliss came back. You guys as freshmen helped Arkansas get to a Sweet 16. And then when we're talking about this championship opportunity the following season, I was at the Sweet 16 Elite Eight games at Reunion Arena in Dallas. I was there and got to attend those. And I'll never forget against Michigan. I mean, this is the Fab Four, what's left over of the Fab Five, a team that had been to back-to-back title games. There was a stretch there where Corliss wasn't quite himself.
Right.
And it went on for a while like that, but you were trading shots in a tight game with guys like Jalen Rose and Juwan Howard and that whole group that was left over from Michigan. That was one of still a great Michigan program. And you guys end up winning that. But it reminded me that it wasn't just always Corliss that had the cape on. It was also Scotty Thurman, not just making late big shots,
right,
but in stages of games carrying Arkansas. So I guess kind of reflecting back on those first 2 years, because I want to get to, I got some questions about your final year with Corliss at Arkansas, but just reflecting back on those 2 years, you said you guys had built a bond coming there. Was there also a trust level that if either one of you was out or either one of you wasn't at your best, that the other one would pick up the slack? Because it sure seems like it translated that way.
Oh yeah, it did. I mean, back in those days, living in Fayetteville, number one, Dixon Street wasn't like Dixon Street, so we didn't have that distraction. All the things that we did together. We were always together, whether that was eating, whether that was going and playing cards, whether that was going to study hall, going to practice, obviously. But we spent a lot of time together, not just Corliss and myself, but our entire team. And that was kind of our makeup. We really believed in one another. Like Corey Beck is one of the toughest guys I've ever played with. And if Corey Beck said something to me, I took it to heart because I believed in him and I trusted in him. Same thing with Dwight Stewart, who just texted me yesterday. Same thing. And so our relationship on the floor was only a reflection of our relationship off the floor. And so when Corliss was out, I knew I had to pick it up. I think I had a couple of games where I sprained my ankle at SMU. I didn't get to play. Didn't get a chance to finish a game at home versus Northwestern State. But I trusted Al Dillard was going to step up. Roger Crawford was going to step up. That was just kind of our makeup. And the beauty of our team was nobody really cared about who scored. I mean, of course, in today's climate, that's what every kid wants to do. They want to have the opportunity to score. For us, it was about the wins. And we wanted to pile the wins up. We wanted to try to be as good as the Mayday teams that had won almost 130 games in 3 years. We wanted to be like that. So we had people that we were looking up to in terms of wanting to be able to measure up that way. And then we had ourselves who were holding each other accountable about each and everything that we did. And it was nothing for Corey Beck to come up to me during the game and say, hey, man, we need you to get going. Hey, Corliss, we need you to get that rebound. And so guys would talk that way, and it just kind of spilled over into our team to where we could have conversations, even in tense moments and when adversity was faced, because we trusted and believed in one another.
I wanted to talk about that stuff because Arkansas, the last few years, back to back to back Sweet 16s, a couple of Elite Eights to start that run. But this is a team that's dealt with adversity and injuries. They may have some question marks going into this Duke matchup with their leading scorer right now, Tremont Mark, questionable after getting hurt against North Carolina. He was, taken out on a stretcher. Testing so far has revealed no significant damage, but he had a spine specialist in Fayetteville yesterday to look at him. We don't have an update since then, Scotty. But I think it's always important to remember, no matter how big the matchup is or how much stakes are on the line, sometimes you got to deal with that kind of adversity. And sometimes it's a fallen teammate or an injury. So I think it's always key to remember that Arkansas has gone through some of this stuff in the past, and some of its best teams and greatest players have dealt with it. All right. I wanted to then focus on your junior season because this is the only time in Arkansas Razorback history where the target was so big, because all those teams you mentioned with Lee Mayberry, Todd Day, and Oliver Miller, and then your teams, there was a target because you guys were typically top 5 ranked. Right. But when you're the defending national champions playing what I think is the toughest schedule ever at Arkansas in y'all's junior year, I mean, Nolan lined it up. I mean, out of the gates, the Hall of Fame Classic against a great UMass team.
Right.
Y'all took it on the chin, but I mean, tell me what it's like. How different was that season than the other ones, just in terms of that big target?
Well, to be honest with you, that season was probably the most challenging season I've ever had in a game of basketball in my career, even playing in Europe or anywhere abroad. And I think the biggest difference was not really understanding what it means, because most of the time it sounds very cliche for a coach to say, you're going to get everyone's best shot. Yeah, what does that really mean? They're going to come to play. These guys have you marked on their calendar. Okay, what does that mean? Then you got to get out there and play the game. And I think for us, we realized what that means. Like, I remember getting beat at Ole Miss and they rushed the floor. I remember getting beat at Auburn and they rushed the floor. Oh. Those things started to resonate. Like, okay, this is these people's national championship game. And so for us, we really I don't think we really saw that until we got smacked at Auburn at the end of the year and having gotten beat at Ole Miss after winning the Classic in Honolulu, the Rainbow Classic. So for us, I think that's when it started to resonate. And to be honest, I really feel like that's when we started to figure out, hey, we got to get more locked in. We got to get back to being who we are. And so I think that's what catapulted us to be able to run all 5 games just to be able to get to the national championship final again that year. And I think that's the difference with us and a lot of other teams is that, like you said, the schedule was hard, but the target was on our back as well. And so when you got a bunch of young men who are kind of feeling themselves a little bit, a little bit, maybe believing the press clippings a little bit, and going up against teams that are maybe a little bit more hungry to prove that they are on your level, like we were those previous 2 years. I think the mindset kind of changed a little bit overall. I think we were still a good team, we were still talented, but I'm not so sure we were as locked in and as focused as we had been.
Yeah, and I mean, I go back and look at that non-conference schedule. You open with UMass, a top two, basically a top two, top five team for sure. Georgetown with Allen Iverson. Of course, UMass had Marcus Camby. Then you talked about the Rainbow Classic out in Honolulu. I believe you had Iowa, Oklahoma, and Cincinnati. Two of those three teams were ranked. You had Missouri that year, back on the non-conference schedule when Missouri was in. It was the Big Eight back then. But you just had a loaded. I'm probably leaving some teams out, but a loaded non-conference. And then the SEC, I think you're right about the fact that forever people looked at it as a football league. Let's not forget, not only in your national championship season did Florida also make it to the Final Four, but you guys get back to the title game a year later. A year after that, Kentucky wins it all, and Mississippi State is in the Final Four. Right. So the SEC had a hell of a run in that stretch of years that you were there. It was a pretty good league. In fact, if you look at it from the Final Four standpoint and some of the NCAA tournament success, there's no doubt about it. Scotty, when you're looking at this matchup now with Arkansas Duke, I know you're busy as a head coach of the Parkview Patriots here in Little Rock, but what are your thoughts what their game is now? What you might know about this Arkansas team? Certainly, Duke always has a high standard over there. They're come in top 10 as usual. What are your thoughts about Arkansas's chances coming into this game playing at Bud Walton, and what do you know about these teams?
Well, I haven't got an opportunity to really watch Duke this year. I did watch them last year, and I know they retained a couple of guys that maybe had pro aspirations and maybe didn't get the evals that they want, or for whatever reason they decided to stay. With Arkansas, obviously I'm here in the state, so I watch it pretty closely. I didn't get to see the North Carolina game, but I have gotten a chance to see the two prior to that. I think this is a team that's still kind of evolving. I think they've still got some things to figure out in terms of, who's going to take the shots, when, who's going to guard who's going to be the facilitator. I'm a big Devo Davis fan, having coached against him. I think he's still trying to figure it out as far as with this team with a bunch of new guys, but I trust in what he's done, and I feel like he's going to be able to, maintain or get back to the level he was at last year, especially when he's in the tournament. I mean, he's been one of our better players each and every year. I think that, Trayvon Mark being out, that's definitely going to have a significant impact whether or not he gets the opportunity to go. But I'm really interested in seeing one of my favorite players, the big kid. I think his last name's Graham, who is not able to play right now for whatever reason. I'm anxious to see him get back because I feel like we've got to have someone that we can throw the ball to in the post that can maybe demand a double team or go get a basket for us. It's hard to make jump shots if you don't have any that's uncontested or any that's you're catching the ball on the move. And so I feel like this team is fairly new, obviously. They're still trying to figure out what their roles are. But, I've got to trust in the fact that Coach Muss has figured out the last couple of years. And I'm not one of these social media guys that panics. I just support and watch from afar. And, I love the kid blocker. I think, I want to speak for Mussman, but I think for us to be successful, he's got to be on the floor. I feel like just what he brings to the table from a defensive standpoint. At the end of the day, you can't have everybody on the floor wanting to shoot the ball. That just doesn't help with offensive continuity, nor that it helps with establishing roles. So I feel like blockers should be playing more, maybe. But I also think there's some other guys that's got to step up. I mean, Mitchell Key's got to play better. He's got to be better. He's been there. He's been here in college now for quite some time. It's time for that experience to start showing. I think the Brazil kid still is kind of getting his rhythm back, but I love the way he goes and rebounds the basketball. His athleticism is off the charts. I think it's crazy. I've always been a Trayvon Mark fan from back when he was in high school. Had the opportunity to kind of dibble and dabble in recruiting him a little bit. But I think the makeup of this team can be successful. I think L. Ellis is still trying to figure out, what he brings to the table. And we all know battle can get us a bucket. So I think it's important of figuring out who are the guys that are going to be the shot takers and who are the guys that are going to be the role players, because ultimately everybody's not going to be able to shoot the score.
You talk about that and I've kept you way beyond what I promised we would do this, but I'm enjoying this. In that, I used to get into Bud Walton Arena because it was open for practice, and I'll never forget Reggie Garrett when y'all had him. And he was a guy that really, in a lot of systems, and before he got at Arkansas, could go and get 20 any night. How hard it was for him? Was it for you? How difficult was it for you guys to convey to him, look, you're one of many right now. That your role isn't. We don't need 20 to 25 from you. Because you know his time there. Look, I always tease you about what y'all used to call him in practice.
Yeah.
But Bill, you used to call him Bill.
Yeah.
But Reggie Garrett, how having a teammate like that and trying to get them to understand they're not going to do at Arkansas what they did at somewhere else.
Well, I think the beauty of Reggie Garrett was, number one, I had a relationship with him from having played with him on a travel team before, so he would listen to me. He was kind of crazy, but he would listen. He was a good guy. He really was a team guy, but he was super talented, very athletic, could do a lot. But we had a strong locker room, and that was the difference with our team, is that guys just didn't tolerate certain things. And if it got to be a point where we felt like we couldn't control it, then we would go to Coach Richardson and let him handle it. And most of the time, the players didn't want that to happen. They wanted us to handle it ourselves. And Coach wanted us to handle it because, to his credit, he always felt like once it gets to him, it's a problem. He's got to deal with it. And so we tried to keep all problems away from him and kind of handle it ourselves. And so for Reggie, the biggest thing where we were like, hey, you want to have the opportunity to win that championship, or you want to have the opportunity to just score the basketball? And so he kind of started to really relish in his role as a defender. And if you remember, I think he had a couple of times where he made some half-court shots, had some super athletic plays, but he really bought in. And that was a credit to our leadership on the team, but also a credit to him being willing to try to sacrifice to see what he could do to help us maybe get another one.
This is kind of I'm gonna let you go here as we're getting close to 30 minutes, but I got to ask you this because I see these debates on social media and they're always interesting ones. And I'm putting you on the spot with a couple of things. Greatest three-point shooter in Arkansas Razorback history and dunker. Same Arkansas Razorback history. This is your opinion. There's no wrong answer now, Scotty. No pressure.
Greatest three-point shooter. I mean, unfortunately, I wouldn't do this if I was still playing, but since I no longer play, I've got to go with myself. And the reason I go with myself is because my percentage was high, and most of the attempts I had were at critical moments. And so, I tease Pat Bradley all the time, like, Pat, you can shoot it, but none of the shots you took really meant anything. And so we kind of joke back and forth. I think Pat was a great shooter. I think Rodney Clark was a great shooter. I think obviously Lee Mayberry and Todd Day were great shooters. Warren Lynn, who nobody really talks about, was a great shooter. I think we've had countless guys that can do basketball, but I've got to put myself in number one. I mean, I hate to do that, but I really feel like I have to. Best dunker. So are we talking in game or are we talking
in game? I mean, and I like runway dunkers, but I like guys that get nasty and challenge dudes. That's my preference. Yeah. I can't tell you what your preference is, so I'm wondering where you are on that.
I got a tie.
Okay.
Got a tie. I got to go Derek Hood.
Woo, that's not bad.
And Sunday Adebayo.
Woo. Both of those guys were in my top 10. I just did a top 15 list. They were both in my top 10. So those are great answers. You can't go wrong on that.
Well, who do you have as your best dunker and best three-point shooter? I'm going to put you on the spot.
I've got Michael. First of all, let me do dunk since we just talked about that. I got Michael Qualls because he cared nothing about anybody's health.
I forgot.
Or his own. And I lean toward two-legged jumpers. I don't know why. I guess because of Dominique Wilkins, who I think is the greatest all-time dunker ever. He was a two-legged jumper. I love two-legged jumpers. That was Michael Qualls. He wasn't the most graceful dunker, but he was nasty.
Man, I got it.
He took on everybody. Greatest three-point shooter. I think it's a tie for me. Okay. I think it's you because of the clutch part, and you hit so many of them. But it wasn't just end-of-game clutch shots. Back and forth. I've talked about that Michigan game. You just have LSU. Some of those shots you hit to carry those. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think it's you, and I think it's Isaiah Joe. Isaiah Joe led the SEC in back-to-back seasons. We sometimes lose sight of guys that don't play 3 or 4 years, and they kind of have a cup of coffee and move on. But he's tied with of Murray, the one that's going off at Denver. What's Murray's first name? But from Kentucky, that played at Kentucky.
Wow.
Isaiah Joe and Murray are tied for the all-time freshman made three-pointers record. Jamal Murray. I had to think about that for a second. And then he led the SEC in both of his years. So I think you two guys are the two greatest three-point shooters. There's been so many of them.
Right.
Al Dillard's one of my favorite three-point shooters because of where he'd pull. You played with him.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. So there's been great ones, but you're definitely at the top of the list, my friend.
It's so funny that you mentioned those two guys because I got the opportunity to coach both of them. Like I helped Isaiah Joe break the freshman record. So I'm a big Isaiah Joe fan. I'm a big Isaiah Joe fan, not just as a player, but as a person. He's one of the nicest young men I've had the opportunity to work with, great family. And then my guy, Mr. Walk On Air, I can't believe I left him off the list, especially after getting the chance to work with him. But I'm a big Michael Qualls fan.
Yeah.
His story was very similar to mine in terms of humble beginnings in North Louisiana, but getting the opportunity to come and play on the big stage. And that dunk he had against Kentucky to seal the deal that night, that was huge.
Woo! That was a big one. Well, Scotty, I appreciate you. Is there anything we didn't talk about that we should have?
No, I think you covered everything, man. I'm excited about the game. I'm actually going to the game. This is going to be my first Razorback game in Bud Walton since I worked there, so I'm really excited. That's
kind of an important thing to bring up. I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't think about asking you. I just assumed you head coaches of high school teams. Y'all got your schedules. Y'all are always playing too, and it's really hard to go watch anybody else. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear you're going to be able to go up there. I'll be there covering it, obviously, as part of the media, so maybe I'll see you while we're there. But I appreciate you having you on today on HogvilleNET, YouTube Live. We're doing a pregame for Arkansas Duke. Unfortunately, the Hogs have lost 3 of 4, aren't ranked right now. It's the first time ever in this matchup that both teams aren't ranked, but Scotty, or at least one of the two teams isn't ranked. But Scotty, you mentioned it, 2-2. That was one of the first things you talked about. This is one of those rubber match games. I understand why you're going to be up there. It's the first ever ACC SEC challenge. It's always big when you play a blue blood, right?
It's super big, man. You're talking about 30 years ago when we had the opportunity to do it. So I want to be anxious to be there to witness history. I really feel like this team is, like we said, it's still gelling. But hey, there's a reason you get out on the floor and have the opportunity to compete. So I look forward to seeing these guys get out there and compete at a high level.
Well, once again, thank you for joining us today and helping us with this. Look forward to catching up with you soon, my friend.
Sounds good, man. I look forward to it.
All right, Scotty. Thank you.
All right, take care.
So I did not put Scotty on the spot and ask him who's going to win this game. I probably should have. He's a homer. He's going to say the Arkansas Razorbacks. But anyway, as we move on through our show, I want to again remind everybody that Arkansas Duke tips off at 8:15 p.m. Central Time. That game is televised nationally on ESPN, and it's a first. An ACC SEC challenge. We know Arkansas has been involved with the SEC and the Big 12 SEC challenge. That no longer exists. Now you're moving into another conference versus conference situation. And what better way for Arkansas to roll out its brand in this event by hosting, it's Duke and North Carolina at the top of an ACC conference. It's, rich in tradition, history. There have been other programs in that conference that have had success and won national titles, but it starts with those two. It's Arkansas versus 7th-ranked Duke on Wednesday, Bud Walton Arena. Until I see you then.